Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in purpose, I want to invite you today into a moment of divine clarity. You've been asking the question that haunts so many. Why would a loving God allow me to be hurt by someone so selfish, so toxic, so narcissistic? You prayed, you fasted, you hoped, and still the heartbreak came. But today, the answer will shift your entire worldview. Today, we're going to dig beneath the surface of your pain and discover the purpose God buried inside your storm. This message is not just to comfort you, it's to awaken you. Purpose is never an afterthought with God. Long before you were formed in your mother's womb, purpose was already written over your life like a divine blueprint. This means that nothing you go through, no matter how painful or confusing, is ever wasted in the kingdom. God doesn't react, He initiates. He doesn't need permission to use pain as a tool of refinement. He's sovereign, which means that even the worst moments in your life are subject to His master plan. So when you ask the question, why did God allow this narcissist to enter my life and cause so much pain? You must look beyond the pain itself. You must see it through the lens of purpose. Because pain without purpose becomes torment, but pain with purpose becomes training. It becomes the fire that forges steel. It becomes the pressure that turns coal into diamonds. It becomes the very thing God uses to birth something in you that comfort never could. The mistake we often make is assuming that divine purpose should come wrapped in comfort, clarity, and ease. But more often, purpose shows up looking like chaos. It looks like heartbreak. It looks like rejection. It looks like betrayal. Because it is through these experiences that God starts chiseling away at what doesn't belong to your calling. The narcissist didn't show up in your life to love you. They showed up to reveal something. Their mistreatment was a mirror. It exposed what you had settled for. It showed you where you were vulnerable, where you still craved approval, where your identity had holes. God, in His infinite wisdom, allowed someone with selfish intent to cross your path, not to harm your destiny, but to align it. Sometimes He lets the wrong person get close just so they can agitate the wounds you've hidden, the trauma you've suppressed, the lies you've believed about yourself. Because God cannot heal what you won't confront. And confrontation doesn't come from comfort. It comes from conflict. The narcissist was the conflict that exposed the disease within your belief system. You may not have realized it then, but that relationship was a turning point. Every tear you cried, every sleepless night, every moment you questioned your worth, it was all a part of a divine awakening. You weren't losing yourself. You were finding the version of you that God intended all along. And it couldn't emerge until you went through the fire. You see, nothing tests character like betrayal. Nothing tests identity like being devalued by someone you gave everything to. And nothing builds strength like having to pick up the pieces of your own heart with no applause, no recognition, and no shortcut. But that's the very place where God does His best work, in the dark, in the silence, in the wilderness of broken expectations. Think of Joseph in the Bible. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into prison, yet all of it was wrapped in the sovereignty of God. Why? Because purpose preceded the pain. Every wound he suffered was guiding him to the throne. Every disappointment was positioning him for dominion. And the same is true for you. When God allows pain, He's not trying to punish you. He's preparing you for purpose, preparing you to walk in authority, preparing you to carry wisdom, not just theory. Because when you've been through something and you've survived it, you gain an anointing that cannot be taught. It must be endured. The narcissist wasn't just a mistake. They were a tool, a temporary assignment, a divine catalyst. But here's the truth most people don't want to face. Some of the greatest lessons in your life will come through people who were never sent to love you, but to stretch you. To break the illusion that you could depend on man more than God. To teach you how to hear the voice of your Creator above the noise of flattery and manipulation. And to remind you that your value is not negotiable. It is eternal. This is why purpose precedes pain. Because God is not trying to destroy you. He's trying to deliver you from small thinking, from weak identity, from emotional slavery, and from the traps of counterfeit connections. That hurt you endured is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of a new dimension of clarity, discernment, and divine authority. So if you're still asking why it had to happen, I invite you to shift the question. Don't ask why me, ask what for. What did this pain uncover in me that God wants to heal? What did this betrayal teach me about my worth, my calling, my boundaries? What if the thing that nearly broke you was the very thing that was breaking the limits of your life? You're still here. That means purpose is still intact. That means God is not finished. And that means the pain you endured will one day become the platform from which you speak life, lead others, and walk in the authority of someone who has overcome. The narcissist may have caused the pain, but God is using it to unlock your purpose. And when purpose begins to manifest, nothing, not even your past, can stop what God has planned for you. You thought you were in a relationship. You believed you were building something sacred, something with future, foundation, and favor. You looked at that person, the narcissist, and saw potential, maybe even promise. You gave, you sacrificed, you compromised. You silenced your voice just to keep the peace. You explained your value, hoping they would eventually see it, but they didn't see it. Not because it wasn't there, but because they were never sent to honor it. They were sent to reveal it. That's the paradox. You thought you were falling in love, but in reality, you were being enrolled. You didn't enter a partnership. You entered a classroom. And the narcissist wasn't just your partner, they were your instructor. They were the professor of pain, the architect of awareness, the mirror you didn't know you needed. They didn't teach you intentionally. They taught you through their neglect, their deception, their manipulation. Every time they lied to you, they taught you something about truth. Every time they invalidated your feelings, they revealed just how much you had been silencing yourself to keep someone else comfortable. You weren't being punished. You were being taught. Some lessons in life don't come through books or sermons or quiet devotionals. Some lessons come through betrayal. And betrayal has a way of piercing you where no sermon can reach. It cuts past your titles, your education, your outward confidence, and slices right into the tender places. Your trust, your identity, your dignity. But here's the mystery of God. He will use even betrayal to build you. He will use your breaking point as your training ground. You thought you were losing something. You thought the narcissist was a setback. But in the divine curriculum of your calling, they were a required course. You don't graduate into purpose without taking the course of pain. You don't walk in power until you've survived manipulation. Because until you've been lied to, you don't really understand what truth costs. Until you've been controlled, you don't fully appreciate what it means to walk in freedom. So you asked, God, why didn't you stop it? And God answers, because there were some things you wouldn't learn any other way. You learned to listen to your gut, not just your heart. You learned that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. You learned that silence isn't always spiritual. Sometimes it's a symptom of suppression. You learn to say no without apologizing, to walk away without needing closure, to value yourself without waiting for validation. And most of all, you learn that not everyone who enters your life is sent to stay. See, we often confuse seasonal people with lifelong purpose, and we try to build temples around temporary visitors. But when someone mistreats you repeatedly, it's not always because they're evil. It's often because you're unwilling to end the lesson. You're trying to graduate without taking the test. But God loves you too much to let you skip it. So He let them hurt you, but only to the point of awakening, not annihilation. The narcissist didn't break you. They introduced you to the parts of you that needed healing. That's why it hurt so deeply, because they didn't just offend you. They offended the part of you that hadn't fully healed yet. That little boy or girl inside of you who still craves being chosen, being heard, being enough. God let the narcissist in because He wanted to bring those wounds to the surface. Not to shame you, but to heal you. And now you're wiser. Not bitter, better. Not broken, rebuilt. You look at yourself today and realize you wouldn't have discovered your voice if someone hadn't tried to silence it. You wouldn't have defined your worth if someone hadn't tried to devalue it. You wouldn't have rebuilt your boundaries if someone hadn't walked all over them. God used the narcissist like a sculptor uses a chisel. The process was painful, but it was purposeful. What was chipped away was never the real you. It was the fear, the people-pleasing, the insecurity, the illusion. So stop resenting the classroom. Stop replaying the betrayal. They weren't your final destination. They were a lesson on the way to your true assignment. They played their part. And now class is over. You've passed. Not because you never cried, but because you finally saw what God was trying to show you all along. You were never meant to be defined by who hurt you. You were meant to be refined by it. You asked God to bless you. You asked Him to take you into your destiny. You prayed for elevation, for clarity, for doors to open and strongholds to break. And what did you get in return? A relationship that confused you, drained you, and left you wondering if God even heard your prayer. You thought you were moving forward, but instead, you were caught in a web of manipulation, control, and emotional torment. That's when the question starts to form in your heart. Why would a loving God allow this person into my life? The answer is not that He ignored your prayer. It's that He answered it, just not in the way you expected. You see, when God is preparing you for something greater, He doesn't always start by giving you what you want. Often He begins by removing what you're attached to, even when you don't realize that attachment is toxic. And one of the most misunderstood moves of God is when He allows a person into your life who isn't your destiny, but instead is a divine interruption, sent not to stay but to reveal. You thought the narcissist was the answer. They came into your life at just the right moment, when you were vulnerable, hopeful, or perhaps desperate for connection. They presented themselves as everything you needed, confident, charming, maybe even spiritual. But behind the mask was deception. You didn't see it at first because God wasn't trying to show you who they were. He was trying to show you who you are without discernment. And that's why divine delay is not denial. It is redirection. The narcissist didn't delay your purpose. They revealed the part of you that would have destroyed your purpose if left unchecked. It's easy to misinterpret silence from heaven as indifference, especially when you're hurting. But God never delays to punish. He delays to prepare. And preparation often looks like pain. See, you were trying to go to the next level with people who were not assigned to your journey. You were asking God to elevate you while still being entangled with individuals who did not honor your call, your value, or your identity. So what did God do? He stepped back and let the narcissists reveal themselves. He didn't interfere, not because He didn't care, but because interference would have interfered with your transformation. The very confusion you experienced became the catalyst that forced you to ask deeper questions, to confront emotional wounds, to rediscover boundaries, to seek wisdom, and to finally prioritize your healing. What looked like a delay in your life was actually divine surgery. God was cutting ties not just to the person, but to the patterns you had normalized. The need for approval, the addiction to chaos, the false definition of love you had accepted. Let's be honest, had the narcissist been kind consistently, you would have stayed. If the manipulation had been subtle enough, you would have adjusted. If the mask hadn't slipped, you would have settled. But God allowed it to escalate so you couldn't ignore it. Because destiny doesn't wait for denial. This person didn't come to delay your future. They came to awaken your discernment. They came to burn down the fantasy so God could build the truth. And here's the truth. You were never supposed to stay there. That relationship wasn't home. It was a hallway. It was never meant to define your identity. It was meant to confront your dependency. What you thought was love was actually a lesson. What you called a delay was actually divine strategy. God knew you couldn't carry what's coming while still carrying who was cursing your soul with confusion. He knew your next season required a higher version of you, a healed, clear, decisive version. And sometimes clarity only comes after chaos. So yes, it hurt. Yes, you felt lost, but you didn't lose time. You gained wisdom. You didn't miss your moment. You found your mission. If you're still mourning the years you think you wasted, let me speak something over you. God is the redeemer of time. What you learned in that relationship, you couldn't have learned in a classroom. The narcissist was not a blessing, but they were used as a tool, a mirror that showed you what you needed to change, elevate, and confront. You didn't fail. You evolved. The delay you experienced wasn't the end of your story. It was the editing process. God cut out the characters who didn't fit the script. He removed the scene that would have sabotaged the plot. And now you're turning the page. So if you're still wrestling with why God allowed it, remember this. He didn't allow it to break you. He allowed it to build something in you that comfort never could. The narcissist was not your destiny. They were the detour that showed you the road back to yourself and back to the God who never left you. Even when it felt like He was silent, He wasn't silent. He was setting you up for something far greater than what you thought you lost. And the answer to your pain It was never about them. It was always about what God was growing inside you. The delay was your divine setup, not a step back, but a vault into your future. Before God can elevate you, before He can position you in places of influence and destiny, He must first expose what is hidden in you and around you. Many people cry out for promotion, for recognition, for purpose, but few understand that elevation is dangerous without exposure. You don't climb higher in the kingdom of God without first being stripped of the things that would sabotage you at the top. The narcissist who came into your life wasn't just a toxic person. They were a mirror. They were sent not to flatter you, but to reveal you. Their manipulation exposed your need for approval. Their lies uncovered your hidden insecurities. Their emotional games pulled on the areas of your heart where identity had not yet been rooted in truth. And while it felt like betrayal, in heaven's eyes it was surgery, necessary, timely, and intentional. See, God is a master architect. Before He builds you, He inspects the foundation. If He finds cracks, places of brokenness, fear, pride, or self-rejection, He won't build around them. He'll allow life to bring pressure to expose those cracks. And what better way to bring those to light than to allow someone into your life who triggers every unresolved wound in you? You prayed for discernment. God answered by letting a narcissist reveal your blind spots. You asked for wisdom. God granted it by showing you what foolishness looks like up close. You asked for strength. He didn't give you a motivational quote. He allowed you to be weakened so that real strength, His strength, could be formed in your spirit. Before God elevates, He exposes. Not to shame you, not to embarrass you, but to prepare you. Because what you don't confront now, you will carry into the next level. And in higher places, your character must match your calling. God knows that influence magnifies what's already inside you. So if you're still addicted to validation, if you're still ruled by the fear of being alone, if you're still insecure, the spotlight will only amplify those weaknesses. God loves you too much to let you rise while you're still in chains. And so He sends the test. The narcissist was the test, not of your worth, but of your readiness. Could you discern the difference between charisma and character? Could you walk away from what fed your ego but starved your soul? Could you recognize the voice of the serpent, even when it came dressed in charm and compliments? Many people want to be promoted by God, but forget that promotion requires purging. You can't take bitterness into your next season. You can't carry unhealed trauma into your next assignment. You can't build a ministry, a business, a legacy on a heart still bleeding from old wounds. So God, in His wisdom, lets the narcissist draw those wounds out. They pull the poison to the surface. They bring to light the parts of you that you had learned to hide even from yourself. And it hurts, because exposure is never painless, but it is always purposeful. Think of a surgeon who must cut deep to remove an infection. If the disease stays buried, it will kill you. But if it's exposed, it can be healed. That's what God was doing. That's why He allowed this, not to punish you, but to cleanse you, to refine you. You didn't just survive the narcissist. You graduated. You learned to say no without guilt. You learned to set boundaries without apology. You stopped confusing being needed with being loved. You stopped giving loyalty to those who only saw you as a tool. You found your voice. You reclaimed your peace. You stopped negotiating your worth. But more than that, you saw God differently. You stopped seeing Him as distant and passive. You began to recognize that even in your pain, He was present. He was guiding the process. You weren't abandoned. You were being trained. See, before Joseph sat in Pharaoh's palace, he was thrown in a pit and sold into slavery by his own brothers. Before David wore a crown, he was hunted like a criminal by the very king he served. Why? Because God doesn't promote without preparation. And preparation always includes exposure. You had to see who they really were. But more importantly, you had to see who you really were. You had to stop building your identity around being needed, accepted, or liked. You had to see that your worth doesn't decrease when someone mistreats you. That love is not proven by how much pain you can tolerate. That discernment is more important than desire. And now you are different. You're wiser, sharper, stronger. Not because time passed, but because truth passed through you. Because the exposure worked. Because the test refined you. And now you're ready. Not for the relationship you thought you lost, but for the purpose that was always waiting for you on the other side of obedience. So don't despise the exposure. Don't resent the pain. It was the very thing God used to get you to this moment. It was never about who hurt you. It was about who you were becoming in the process. And the version of you who is rising now, that's the one God can trust with elevation. Before God ever uses a person publicly, He forms them privately. And one of the greatest tools in God's hand is not comfort, not applause, not visibility, but the wilderness. The wilderness is not a punishment. It is a process. It is the place where God strips you of everything that was never meant to go with you into your purpose. And when you've been wounded by a narcissist, lied to, manipulated, devalued, you might think you've fallen off course. But the truth is you've just been enrolled in the school of the wilderness. Some of you are trying to figure out why the most painful seasons in your life also seem to be the ones where heaven went silent. It wasn't abandonment. It was consecration. God was doing something deeper than you could perceive in the moment. He was letting you feel the loss so He could build the truth. He let the false comfort fall apart so that you would no longer depend on a counterfeit voice. The narcissist was loud, but the wilderness is where you learn to hear God's whisper. There is something unique about the wilderness that you won't find in prosperity. In prosperity, you gather fans. In the wilderness, you gain focus. In comfort, you become complacent. But in dryness, you become desperate for clarity, for truth, for authenticity. God allowed you to walk through that toxic relationship, not because He was cruel, but because He was calling you to come out of agreement with false sources. And sometimes the only way you realize what's false is when it leaves you empty. When Israel came out of Egypt, God could have taken them straight into the promised land, but He didn't. He led them into the desert. Why? Because although they were free physically, they were still slaves mentally. You can be out of the relationship and still be bound by the identity it created in you. You can be out of the abuse and still be loyal to the lie it planted. So God brings you into the wilderness, not to shame you, but to rewire you. The wilderness is where your appetites are tested. It's where your motivations are exposed. It's where the high of people-pleasing dies and the clarity of pleasing God is born. In the narcissistic relationship, your soul became addicted to attention, affirmation, control, or the fantasy of fixing someone broken. But in the wilderness, God detoxes your spirit. He silences every other voice so that you finally begin to recognize His, and in the silence, wisdom is born. Wisdom doesn't come from reading more verses or attending more conferences. Wisdom is forged in the crucible of experience, when God brings truth to collide with your trauma. In the wilderness, you stop quoting scriptures you don't believe, and you start living the ones you barely understood. Because you've tasted bitterness, you begin to value sweetness. Because you've been gaslit, you start craving truth. And because you've been unseen, you begin to see yourself through God's eyes. The wilderness is not a place of weakness. It's a place of recalibration. God removes the noise of flattery and false intimacy so He can restore your spiritual hearing. The narcissist taught you to fear rejection, to strive for validation, to compromise for peace. But God brings you to a place where the only voice that matters is His. And when you finally hear it again, it doesn't sound like condemnation. It sounds like identity. That's where wisdom begins. When you stop reacting from pain and start responding from purpose. When you no longer seek attention to feel worthy, but you walk in confidence because you know you are chosen. When you no longer try to fix the broken, but you carry healing because you yourself have been healed. That's why the wilderness matters. That's why God let you walk through what you did, because He had to train you before He could trust you. Not just with a platform, not just with influence, but with truth. And truth must be stewarded by those who have been transformed by it, not just informed by it. The narcissist showed you the counterfeit. The wilderness revealed the authentic. And that's why you had to go through it. You don't come out of the wilderness the same way you entered. You enter shattered, but you exit whole. You enter questioning everything, but you exit knowing exactly who you are. You come out no longer desperate for attention, but anchored in assignment. Because wilderness wisdom is not about sounding deep. It's about becoming grounded. You now know that every delay had a reason. Every rejection was redirection. Every tear was a seed. And the wisdom you carry is not theory, it's testimony. And that testimony will not only guard your future, it will guide others out of their past. So don't despise the wilderness. Don't resent the silence. Don't curse the loneliness. It was never meant to destroy you. It was always meant to develop you. And now, because you've survived it, you're no longer just free. You're wise. You stayed longer than you should have. You gave more than you had. You excused behaviors that drained you, belittled you, and made you question your own worth. Why? Because deep down, you didn't fully know who you were. And when you don't know your identity, you will trade your royalty for attention. You will mistake toxicity for passion. You will call trauma a bond and abuse a test. That's why God let it happen, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. The narcissist didn't just manipulate you. They mirrored your hidden beliefs about yourself. They simply confirmed what a wounded part of you already feared, that you weren't enough, that you had to earn love, that being chosen required shrinking. And so without knowing it, you agreed with their lies, not just externally, but spiritually. You made peace with dishonor because you hadn't yet made peace with your own value. This is where God's mercy looks like silence. It looks like distance. You prayed for the relationship to be restored. You pleaded for the narcissist to change. You begged God to fix it. But the silence of heaven wasn't rejection. It was revelation. God was letting the dysfunction play out, not because he approved of it, but because he wanted you to see it. You couldn't see it before, because the need to be loved blurred your vision, because the desire to be accepted overpowered your discernment. You see, when your identity is not established in God, it becomes shaped by people. And people who are broken will never give you a whole image of yourself. The narcissist didn't steal your identity. They revealed that you didn't yet have one. You were borrowing your sense of self from how they treated you. When they loved you, you felt valuable. When they ignored you, you felt invisible. When they praised you, you felt worthy. When they discarded you, you felt worthless. That's not love. That's bondage. So God, in his infinite wisdom, used the narcissist to expose the fracture within you. He used the manipulation to confront your need for validation. He allowed the gaslighting to uncover your dependence on approval. It wasn't punishment. It was diagnosis. And until you see the wound, you can't begin the healing. You had to realize that the way they treated you wasn't about love. It was about control. And the reason you stayed wasn't because you were weak. It was because you were unaware. You didn't yet know you were a daughter, a son, a vessel of divine royalty. You didn't yet know that your value is not negotiable, that your worth is not up for debate, that your identity was sealed before they ever came into your life. The narcissist was a counterfeit connection sent to expose the counterfeit beliefs you had about yourself. And while it hurt deeply, it was effective, because now you know, now you see, now you understand that love doesn't come wrapped in confusion, that peace is not supposed to be paid for with pieces of your soul, that the right people don't make you feel small to feel powerful. And here's the divine irony. The very person who tried to dismantle you was used by God to develop you. The very pain that tried to kill your confidence birthed your clarity. You don't beg to be loved anymore. You don't explain your value anymore. You don't compromise for connection anymore, because now you've encountered the truth. And truth always demands transformation. You didn't just survive the narcissist. You were refined by the experience, because the fire that was meant to burn you ended up purifying you. You walked out different, wiser, stronger, more whole. And not because the narcissist changed, but because you did. You no longer need their apology to heal. You no longer need closure to move on. You've realized that healing is not about what they give you. It's about what God reveals to you. This is the power of divine design. What the enemy used to distort your identity, God used to define it. What they meant as manipulation, heaven used as a mirror. And when you finally saw yourself, your true self, you couldn't stay in that dysfunction any longer. You couldn't unsee what God showed you. And that was the beginning of your deliverance. So yes, it hurt. Yes, it broke you. But it also built something inside of you that nothing and no one can take away. You found your identity in the ashes. You discovered your worth in the wreckage. You met yourself in the silence left by their departure. And now you know God never wanted you to be attached to someone who required you to abandon yourself. He let them hurt you because he was done watching you settle. He let them walk away because he was ready to walk you into purpose. He allowed the pain because he loved you too much to let you stay blind. They revealed the truth, not about them, but about you. And that truth changed everything. Pain has a voice, and though it doesn't speak in language we recognize at first, it speaks with clarity when we're willing to listen. What you experienced with the narcissist wasn't just emotional trauma. It was prophetic pain, the kind of pain that doesn't just echo what you went through, but points to what you're called to walk into. It tells you where the healing must begin, where your power was buried, and where your next season is waiting. See, when you're in pain, you become still. You become quiet. And in that stillness, the voice of God becomes louder than the voice of others. When the narcissist betrayed you, manipulated you, invalidated your emotions, you didn't just feel heartbreak. You felt an inner shaking. Something inside you that had been asleep began to stir. That pain was not just a sign that something was wrong. It was an announcement that something divine was being awakened. Pain is a divine signal. It doesn't just speak of the past. It speaks of potential. It reveals what you've been tolerating, what you've been hiding, and where you've been settling. You didn't just cry because they left. You cried because deep down you realized you had abandoned yourself long before they did. And God allowed the pain because he needed you to wake up. He needed you to see what he sees in you. And sometimes that can only happen when your heart is cracked wide open. The narcissist was a mirror, a distorted one. Yes, but a mirror nonetheless. Through their manipulation, God revealed the parts of you that still longed for external validation. Through their emotional withholding, he showed you the emptiness of seeking worth through broken people. The pain wasn't random. It was tailored. It was crafted with surgical precision to bring you to a place where you could no longer ignore the truth about who you are and who you're not. The pain pushed you to confront your agreements with low self-worth, your silence in the face of dishonor, your fear of being alone. That wasn't just emotional discomfort. It was the Spirit of God highlighting the fractures in your soul that he was ready to heal. The pain was not a tomb. It was a womb, a place of pressure, yes, but also a place of transformation. Something had to break for something new to be born. You may have thought the narcissist came to destroy you, but really they came to activate you. The tears you cried were watering seeds that had been dormant inside you for years. Seeds of strength, seeds of discernment, seeds of voice, seeds of clarity. And as painful as it was, you must recognize that the pain wasn't punishment. It was prophecy. It was God saying, I will not let you stay blind to your worth another day. Every sleepless night was a lesson. Every manipulated conversation was a revelation. Every time you were gaslit into silence, God was preparing to restore your voice with power. You couldn't see it then, but you were being trained in the dark for a calling that required depth. You were being shaped through sorrow for an assignment that demanded wisdom. God was not ignoring your cries. He was collecting them, storing them, and turning them into oil, anointing oil. You can't minister healing until you've survived hurting. You can't speak with authority until you've walked through agony. That pain was your introduction to a realm of spiritual depth that comfort could never offer you. And now, because you have tasted brokenness, you carry compassion. Because you've walked through deception, you carry discernment. Because you've endured dishonor, you carry honor with reverence. Pain shaped your purpose in a way that theory never could. Sometimes we think prophets are just people who hear from God. But pain, when surrendered to God, becomes prophetic. It starts to teach you how to read atmospheres, how to hear beyond the words, how to discern the spirit behind the smile. That pain you went through rewired your discernment. It fine-tuned your instincts. It sharpened your ability to see what you used to excuse. You're not paranoid now, you're prophetic. Because now you recognize what you didn't before. Now you move slower, think deeper, and trust God more than you trust your emotions. The narcissist didn't just break your heart, they opened your eyes. They were not your destiny. They were your training ground. What they meant for evil, God allowed for your education. And now you carry a revelation that can't be taught in a classroom or bought in a bookstore. You carry the authority of someone who made it through the valley of manipulation and came out with your soul intact. You may have limped out, but you came out. Your story is not just one of pain. It's one of prophecy. And the pain that tried to silence you is now the very thing God will use to amplify your voice. Others may see your scars and feel pity, But you see them and feel power. Because every scar says, I survived what was sent to kill me. And now I walk in a wisdom that only pain could teach. That's why pain is not your enemy. It is your prophet. It pointed the way forward, and it will never let you forget who you truly are again. Before God can place a crown on your head, he must remove the chains from your soul. Dominion is not something you simply inherit. It is something you are prepared for. God is a wise king, and he does not give authority to someone still enslaved to what he's trying to deliver them from. And so the narcissist in your life wasn't just a mistake, a detour, or a trauma. It was a divine tool, not sent by God, but used by God. Because before he could entrust you with dominion, he had to deliver you from dysfunction. Many people want to walk in power, influence, leadership, and purpose. But they don't realize that dominion without deliverance is a disaster waiting to happen. Because what you don't allow God to heal, you will carry into your assignment and infect others with. God does not promote brokenness. He heals it first. So instead of asking God why the narcissist was allowed to get close, begin to ask, what was God trying to heal in me through that experience? You see, you cannot cast out what you are still bound to. You cannot lead others while still being led by your wounds. The narcissist exposed the fractures in your soul, your hunger for validation, your silence in the face of disrespect, your tolerance of dishonor. And God in his mercy allowed it so that you would finally confront what you thought you could manage. You couldn't see the infection until the pressure revealed it. And so God used the narcissist to press on what was still unhealed. God always delivers before he empowers. When he delivered Israel from Egypt, he didn't just take them to the promised land overnight. He walked them through the wilderness. Why? Because they had been physically freed but mentally enslaved. They left Egypt, but Egypt had not left them. Likewise, some of you walked out of the relationship, but the relationship didn't walk out of you. You still think like the broken version of yourself. You still speak through the voice of pain. You still function through the lens of fear. And God says, before I give you dominion, I need to detox you from that system. The narcissist in your life was not your punishment. They were your process. They pulled the mask off your soul. They revealed how you performed for love, how you overextended for acceptance, how you confused being needed with being valued. And it took being broken to realize you were never supposed to be built on them in the first place. Deliverance is not just about casting something out. It is about walking something through. It is a process. It is the slow dismantling of every lie you believed about yourself. It is the unraveling of every identity you wrapped around someone else's opinion. It is the holy confrontation between your past and your promise. And God orchestrated a season of affliction to bring it all to the surface. Because God cannot bless who you pretend to be. He cannot anoint a counterfeit identity. So in his mercy, he let you walk through the fire, not to burn you, but to refine you. Because dominion without character will corrupt you. And God is not interested in gifting you a throne that will become your grave. So he sends deliverance first. This is why you couldn't stay with the narcissist. This is why the relationship had to crumble. Because you prayed for influence. You asked for purpose. You wanted to be used mightily. And God heard you. But he also knew he had to purify the vessel. Not just externally, but internally. He had to remove the hidden idols, the addiction to approval, the fear of abandonment, the scarcity mindset, the victim mentality. He had to empty you so he could fill you. Because dominion is not about domination. It is about stewardship. It is about responsibility. It is about leading with integrity and influence born out of transformation. So if you want to walk in kingdom authority, you must be willing to be purged of worldly patterns. And that is what the narcissist exposed. Not just their toxicity, but your own entanglement with dysfunction. What hurt you, trained you, what broke you, built you, and what was meant to silence you, actually prepared you to speak. Now you're not just someone who survived pain, you are someone who carries revelation. And that's why dominion is now possible. Because now you're not functioning from ego, but from essence. You're not leading from trauma, but from truth. You've been delivered, and now you are ready to reign, not over people, but over systems, over fear, over doubt, over the enemy who tried to destroy your destiny. This is the moment where your story turns, because you now understand deliverance was never a detour, it was a door. And on the other side of that door is not just healing, it's authority. Not just restoration, it's rulership. Not just survival, it's strategy. God has brought you through the fire, and now he can trust you with the crown. You're not who you used to be. And because of that, now you're ready.